I was thinking I'm compelled to I was compelled to do a bit that was entirely insufferable, in which I did the whole introduction of this podcast just in like this voice real quiet for like I don't think I can manage that level of insufferability today. Welcome to the Story of the Apprentice podcast. It's a podcast where we talk about D&D and storytelling and becoming a professional GM and stuff and other shit. We're a little behind on our recording, so this will probably get sent to my other computer, then processed and posted maybe by the end of the day today or tomorrow. I'm one host, Jesse T. William, and with me, as always, is the apprentice words,
SCT Pillium.
Tessie T. William. Yeah. Um, I was just gonna blurt it out because I wasn't sure if you'd seen.
No, I definitely saw. I kind of expect it. Like when I get it, I'm like, what's my name today?
What's the name today? Yeah, yeah. Special name every day for a special little guy. Tug or Tessie. Why are we here?
We're here to talk about D&D.
Wrong. Um,
Oh, okay.
we're
My
actually it
B.
is the it's the Arby's podcast where we slander Arby's all day.
Oh, so fucking
Uh,
gross. Brandon got Arby's the other day and I walked in, I looked at him and I went, really?
why did he get?
I don't know.
Because we
Hey,
literally
babe.
he just
I wanted
edited
to
a clip.
reason.
What?
Why'd you get Arby's the other day?
What are you talking about?
Why'd you get Arby's the other day?
Hmm?
Just shrugged and goes,
Uh,
it was there.
yeah, you know what? That's a reason.
Not every meal has to be 5 stars, gentlemen.
I don't know. I just feel like you should have a little bit more self-respect.
The next clips coming in from him are just us really heavily edited together to make us say horrible things
Oh, wonderful.
and cancel us.
Yeah, that'll really bring in the views.
Yeah. Let's garner a really strong base in the right wing and see how far
Mm,
that gets us.
yeah,
God, I hate the internet sometimes.
it would work. Like if we just like that's the terrible thing about
Oh
it
yeah.
is if we just like lied and just started saying a bunch of like really outlandish like right wing like just spewed the rhetoric like it would go
Yeah.
crazy.
Both of us need to I mean not that I present in any like non-masculine way, but both of us need to attempt to lean into our assigned at birth roles if we want to garner
Yeah,
that audience though, because it's not a
I
lot of right-wing people are coming
yeah.
up and being like, what's this Tucker guy?
Some of them like the
You know,
right wing trans thing. Like
that is
that like
true. That
really
is true.
gets some people.
Mhm. Mhm. I'm
But
trans, but I
ew,
hate my people and I want nothing but
they're
ill will for
terrible.
them. Yeah.
It's that turf deal.
Yeah. Slam.
Slam.
I well, do you have anything to I because I usually just go into it, and I know you prefer, I think, sometimes for me to take the lead, but also I feel bad about talking for extensive periods of time, even though people tell me I'm interesting.
So here's the thing. You could like leave it to me and I'd have like things to say and
Hmm.
talk about. However, I don't think they'd I hate my cow right now. Go back to sleep. She's usually sleeping at this time of day. I don't know why she's awake right now. Go to bed. Go to sleep. Go be literally anywhere else. Um, but however, I don't know. I feel like I'm not put together. Like I'll just like kind of like bounce from thing to thing, tangent to tangent. There's like a few things, that again I feel like I could kind of rant about. However, um, I don't mind like doing whatever's. Brandon actually asked earlier today. He was like, "Do you guys just kind of like talk about whatever, or do you have like things? Do you have like bullet points?" And I was like, "Sometimes Jesse does," and he was like, "Not
Yeah.
you," and I was like, "I don't know. I just wing it."
I
We could talk about that. We've been talking about improving sessions a lot
oh yeah.
outside of the podcast, so that might be a little
Well,
fun
we can
topic.
certainly start. There is something I want to talk about. But we can start with improv. So I have gotten to a so I earlier this year I made a TikTok, got like 10 views or something. I could have said it on the podcast as well, but anyway, it was a TikTok um about prepping long-term campaigns.
Mhm.
And most of the prep work is done in the first, like, I don't know, 2/3, 3/4, 4/5 for the most of the campaign, right? You do a lot of prep, and then as time goes on, you're doing setup. The time goes on, and then everything has been set up, and you're just knocking things down.
Mhm.
You don't need to make as many new NPCs, new storylines. It's just going through the motions. And I've definitely reached that point in Folia. So that's the setting where I have 8 campaigns. And over the last, and this is across multiple settings as well, but over the last week, um, I've partially because I've been a little dead inside and tired, um, but also partially because I don't fucking need to. But so Wednesday, this week, I did not have a single thing written for any of the 3 of my sessions. Tuesday, it was a big crossover. It was like 4, so I had a bunch written. Sunday, 3 sessions, nothing written. Um, Saturday, 2 sessions, only wrote one. So like 1, 4, 7, and then last Thursday as well. My home game, I didn't write shit for that session. Um, and today, I've not written anything for my sessions. Again, mostly because there's just been a shit ton of setup, and now it's just knocking down. And at this point, like I'm gonna sorry. So I'm gonna just say the thing, and we'll get around to discussing it. But like, yeah, like 10 or so sessions in the last like week and a half, I have um ran without preparing a single new thing, like just like blank pages in my notebooks. And they all have been mostly great. There's a single maybe period of like 30 minutes towards the end, or 30, 45 minutes towards the end of the Sunday session where I was like trying to force an event to happen because a big crossover thing and getting people in the right place at the right time. I didn't really allow time for like the right feelings to be had. And I could kind of feel that, like the kind of like dissonance between like where I was trying to push the session and where the characters and players are feeling. Um, but other than that, I mean, that's something that I would have had trouble with anyway because it was still heading in the same direction even if I had written it down. Yeah,
Mm.
improv the shit out of my games recently.
Me as well. Mostly because I was tired. I mean, I always kind of have like I create like this wheel, and these are like the big things, and like generally where the plot is heading. Everything in between that, like so a session will happen. I'll kind of like write notes on what happened that session and like where it seems like the characters are heading, and then like there is my kind of like goals, and it's the possibilities of things we will hit. Sometimes that page is uncomfortably sparse. Sometimes I'm like, but that's also because sometimes I get into a session, I go, this is what I think we're going to do. And
Mhm.
then the session starts, and I'm like, that's not right. We actually need to do this. This other thing is like more important or like more fitting for like the pace we're moving at, or like just doesn't make sense. And then I just make shit up
Mhm. What
as far
I
as like
have,
encounters go. But
mm, oh, here's another fun thing. The amount of like random mechanic monsters that I've just improvised as well. It's been a little impressive for me because I like kind of like thinking about, I like making my monsters. I have a whole Patreon, all this shit. I like designing monsters. I've had like a couple in the past like month or two that I think the players thought was like a whole thing with some intent, and then was
mm,
just a silly little invisible non-existent thing. Um, but what I find with um, me in particular, and the way I improv things, because I try to be a story first um, GM.
Mhm.
Um, what am I saying here? Try to be a story first GM. So the things I need to keep track of are like how the overarching themes fit into the sessions, where each group is in like realizing or understanding those themes, and then just put things in front of them to um, reaffirm those themes in one way or another. And then there's, like the setup and lore and like continually like recontextualizing, because especially in a story this big, right? When you have 8 campaigns in a single setting, all kind of influencing each other, I've realized recently, especially with this big crossovers, I've stopped putting the recaps in the hands of the players and been like,
Mhm.
here's what you need to know, because not all of you were present for all of these events. Here's what's going on. Um, yeah, and I'm also like in a period of also generally changing the style of how I run the games to get it away a bit from the D&D style, and I've talked about that a bit. But yeah, I find um I'm very much a if I have my foundation of themes, I have a very like well thought out world with a lot of different feelings. Um I I know how to instinctively at this point carry people through a session. Um, and I've had very high success rate with it, I think.
Yeah. Mm, I'm still figuring all that shit out.
I think it just comes for me. And again, I say this shit all the time. I felt like I said this 10 times this week already. But um, Falia has been a setting for me for 2.5 years.
Mm,
So like a year and a half before I started running it professionally, it existed, and it has even before that, like foundations of it go back to my very first like long term D&D camp, or like my the first D&D campaign I finished. There are all these little connections and like world building principles and basically like structures to the like input of questions of like, what if this, and I have a bunch of like, well then this and then this, if that makes sense. I think that's like a coding reference or something. I
mhm,
did coding in grade 11. But I'm not I'm trying to, I'm reflecting on my words now and seeing if there's
mm,
like a value to be extracted other than just like, because I feel as though the longer I run D&D, um, the less I need to um, write notes at all. Like I'm pretty
mm,
confident that I could run a pretty satisfying like 6 to 10 session campaign without touching a notebook. I could sit down, and a large part of that is just because I'm sober and smart, and my memory retention is great, and I don't need to worry about forgetting what happened last week. But also because I think as long as I know what story I want to tell,
mhm,
and the players are on board and they've been communicated with, I think that I'm fucking unstoppable. I'm invincible.
mhm,
I have so many, literally, what my brain's doing right now. I'm gonna shut up in a second because I see the inclination for you to say something. But
mm,
literally, my what my brain's doing in this moment is just like Rolodexing through all the different things that I could talk about that I've prepared of like
mhm.
gods, lands, factions, whatever. But I am not going to do that because that's not helpful or interesting.
Can't just lord dump on everybody.
Yeah.
Although I understand the urge. I get it all the time. I was having it really bad last night when I was thinking about certain things that like my Thursday players are going to run into down the line. So that's the thing, is that like I know I'm going to tangent a little bit here, and I
Oh,
know a
tangent.
couple of my Thursday players watch this. I've had a few of them say what they think is going on, and they're so terribly fucking wrong. I mean, it's great. Like, it's not like, oh, you're wrong, stupid. It's like, like little cackling. Um, and so sometimes I get like such a strong urge, especially when we're just talking about the session after, especially when they're doing stars and wishes. They get to the wishes, and I'm like, if only you knew, if only you fucking knew. But I can't say anything. I feel like I'm in a conscious state of vibrating because I can't like. And so occasionally I like walk up to like a roommate or something and I'll be like, I have to talk about this. I have to say something to somebody. And like occasionally one of my Thursday players knows things. Shout out Jack, because Jack is also partially responsible for the world. But that's also because sometimes I will tell Jack little spoilers. Not a lot of things about Jack's own character, but about other characters. But that's because I played with Jack a lot. And so Jack is one of those players where like I can give Jack the most meta spoiler of all. And we'll get to the session. He plays so stupid. He'll play so fucking dumb. Like he doesn't know any, and he truly like plays it like he doesn't know anything. It's very impressive. It doesn't seem to affect like the way he decides to move forward with his character at all. Um, which is very nice because it means on occasion I can talk about certain things. I can like talk about like not even just lore stuff, but things that are going to happen without feeling like it's going to like absolutely ruin the experience. Not everything. Some things are just for me, my head. But I understand that urge. I get it a lot with like my players. There was something more important that I was going to say before I said that. um, in relation to, I guess, kind of the whole everything you were just talking about there. But now I don't even remember what it was. I'm not good at the whole podcast thing. So if sometimes I like think about this, I'm like, I'm not like really good at professionally talking. I think I'm very fun. I think I'm like a fun DM and I can have my like really cool professional moments. However, I'm like so much more accustomed to talking to even paid customers in like a very friendly way. This could just be Starbucks because like Starbucks' whole thing was like you're going to treat the customers like you're friends with them. And so it becomes very natural for me to like, we're pals. Probably gives the wrong idea, but I'm just used to speaking to people like that, and I'm more comfortable speaking to people like that. Um, so I kind of worry that sometimes it may be a subconscious manipulation tactic into getting them to like me. Don't tell anybody though.
Yeah, yeah. No,
And
I'll
that
keep
goes
it
to the
secret. Yeah,
audience as well.
for
Don't tell
sure. Yeah.
anybody.
Mhm. Um, you can people who watch, which is just mostly our players,
Mhm.
the vast wealth of players. I'm sure there's like one. There are people who like click through from TikTok. I don't know if they like keep up though. I don't know what the engagement
Mhm.
is. I don't know if we
You
have
just got to keep doing it.
fans, yeah.
Yeah.
But what was I saying here? I think you'd be able to track the like me becoming more like an intentional, maybe not like entertainer. I wouldn't go so far as to say an entertainer, but like performer in my storytelling, like in or like literally like not like my
Mm.
storytelling as like a skill, but like literally as I tell stories, I am more cognizant of um like being maybe a bit animated, slowing down my speech, or not even like really intentionally,
That's
but
something
just
that I have to work on is slowing down my
yeah,
speech. I'm a very naturally fast talker, and that's been something that I've been trying to like chill out a little bit and bring it down a few levels of like how quickly I'm moving and how quickly I'm like running through a description, which isn't like, it's not because I'm trying to rush anything. I just,
Mhm.
my mouth is going. But that's something I've been trying to work on lately is slowing down my speech and
Yeah.
being a little bit more intentional with that.
Yeah. Um, but yeah, it really started with the first episode, and just listening to us being like,
Which
and
I
I was
do
like,
think has gotten better.
yeah,
Tell you, the people who watch us regularly, let us know if we're just
get in
actually
the
as bad.
comments, folks.
I know Thomas. Thomas, I fucking see you. I know you're counting the uhs and ums, bastard.
Oh, tally. Um, oh, there's one there. But I
No.
think for well, you know what else I noticed though, because I've been listening to like a Critical Role and not to mention 20, but Worlds Beyond Number. I think Worlds Beyond Number is like a really like that's I the storytelling in that is what I aspire to. Like what I wish I could have with players, which is not to say I have expectation of players being like that, but like that is like what I would be going for, is that style of storytelling.
Mm.
But all of the DMs, Abria, Brennan, Matt, us all over the place. Brennan talks so fast and has so many us, and I was like, oh, I never
Brennan's
noticed
and yeah, yeah.
until I started thinking about it myself. So it's not the end of the world, but I think
No.
there is like a you could aim to be a bit more intentional with how you speak. And I think like for me, not to put myself above any other DM, but I do this currently. As of well, actually, there's another thing to talk about, but currently 13 to 14 times a week, could be 15 times a week, 14 to 15 times a week, um, by next week, depending on how things go. I have a new game that's starting on Monday at 11 a.m. and then a like sister game on Fridays at 11 a.m. But it looks like we're going to end up putting most of the one oh we have one person on the Friday. I really just need two people for each game, but it's difficult to get players, and I haven't had a brain to do a TikTok about it.
I
Um,
understand. I'm really
but
trying to slot a fourth person into my Saturday game, and I'm kind of struggling with
it's
that right
hard to
now.
get people. It's hard. But I do this at least 13 times a week. Um, and I have been doing that for specifically at 13 times a week for at least 3, 4, maybe 5 months, which is a lot of D&D. It's a lot. So it's like I'm constantly every almost every day at this point, every other week, I will be running D&D every day at least once. So the skills is like building up a lot in me of and that I'm like thinking about how I run all the time and managing play. That's another. I just there's a million thoughts. I have a million thoughts. Are there anything? Is there anything else you want to say on that topic, Kat?
Uh, she's here. She wants to be a guest. She wants to be a guest star.
We have a lot of guests this episode.
We do have a lot of guests this episode. Brandon, my cat Hypatia.
Mhm.
It's wonderful. Um, but no, mostly because I feel like we switched from talking about the improv to something else. um, though I did have a question to ask you that I was like, oh,
Sure.
we'll talk about it on the pod
On the
instead of
pod?
and so yeah, like we were talking about D&D wait, yesterday.
Yes.
Because even when we hang out, we talk about D&D.
It's the only
Um,
thing that exists.
yeah. And we have two conversation topics. We talk about the things going on in our life and our little feelings, and then we talk
Mhm.
about D&D, and those are the things we talk about. Um, God damn it, I just said but I was yesterday. I had a conversation with a player, um, and this player has had already kind of expressed to me once of like the worry that they're like kind of take up too much like space within the sessions.
Mm.
And I was thinking about it, and I was like thinking about like all the players in that game and like how they play and how I've seen them play, and even when I've like given them kind of a lot of time, like the way they react to that and whatnot. But I was thinking about like the whole thing about like face players. And there's just something like it's something that I didn't experience when I was running D&D, like my home games, because I was playing with my friends. So they were all talking all the time. You know what I mean? I didn't have to like that's not something I really like had to think about. And then as I've started running D&D like professionally, there are definitely like people who not so much my Saturday game, but my Saturday game's really small. It's just the 4 players, and they all have like a very most of them know each other. Tice, Thomas, Elijah, and then the one other person that only knew Elijah just has really good energy. Like they all kind of mesh well. But my Thursday game like has more people who don't know each other or play kind of differently. You know what I mean? But this is something like I've also realized like with my Monday Witchlight game, which does even include friends, but friends from 2 different groups. And I've just like noticed that certain players will kind of take on that role of like they do most of the talking and they do a lot of the role play when it comes to NPCs and kind of lead the group through things. And it kind of got me like thinking, and I've not like asked a player this, but sometimes it makes me go like, I hope they're still having fun if like this is just kind of the way that they engage with D&D, or perhaps there is something that I could be doing that I haven't kind of caught on yet with the quieter players that might cause them to interact more in those moments. You know what I mean? Instead of it being kind of like the same 1 or 2 players, sometimes 3 who tend to be interacting with the world a lot. So it's just something I was thinking about and like wondering about your like experience with like kind of like heavy face players versus players who are a little quieter. Have
Yeah. So I have a million thoughts about this. I observe it all the time, especially in crossovers. I had a instance this week where I had to tell a player to like, hey, please wrap up what you're saying because there's other people to get to here. Which was no hate on that player. He just kind of talks a lot. Um, but yeah, in the most that you can do, I think, is that at the beginning of the campaign, try to share around the focus. Try to move around because again, some people are a bit more shy. Um, so try to give everyone little spotlights and try to make a dynamic because at a certain point, um, uh, players are um kind of have to put themselves in scenes. There's
mm-hmm.
only so much you as a DM can do
Mm-hmm.
to constantly put things in front of them, and there's going to be tons of time where not that their character doesn't belong or they don't naturally fit, but that it won't make sense for you to set up a scene and say this character should say something here because there are faces at the party. So there are players who do generally like just like to sit back, not say as much. They're a bit more reserved. That's how they do it. And that is fine. There's always going to be discrepancy, but
Mm-hmm.
there's also so the thing I've noticed with a couple of players in crossovers is that some people just love to um, do their bits and have their role play, but will consciously or unconsciously take up way too much time with like 1 or 2 players. And again, I've only really noticed it in the last couple of weeks, and I don't know what to do about that because it's one thing if like, oh, this is the face character, they talk to the NPCs, and then
Mm-hmm.
people talk
Like I put you
about
in
themselves.
a kind of like a plot related encounter
Yeah,
and information is to be
yeah.
had, and there's like something that happens is that there's like a beat of silence when the face character player is like kind of aware,
Mhm.
because the in my games, at my games at least, I've noticed that my face players are very aware of it. In fact, a couple of them have come to me and been like, hey, I'm really like I'm worried I'm too much.
Mhm.
So that they're aware, they know, which is wonderful because it puts me in a really good position to communicate to them if more time is needed with another character and they're super accepting of that. There's always like an encounter is put in front of them, information is to be had, you know what I mean? Like a conversation with an NPC, something, something. And there's always like a beat of silence. And I can tell the face is waiting for somebody else, and then they don't. And then the face, I think there's kind of like, okay, well, nobody's doing the thing, so I'm gonna do the thing because I would have done it anyway. And that's like sometimes I don't know what to do about that, where I'm like, did
I
anybody
think
else?
it comes down to like,
So sometimes I've just gotten sorry to the point where I like sometimes I'll depending on the situation, I'll be like, how does this character feel about this going on right now?
mhm,
To try to like be like,
yeah,
do the thing.
the it comes down to the skill of the players.
Yeah.
Like as players to because it you as a player, again, like the DM is not there to present fun to you. You have to make your fun of the game. You have to. I had a campaign where I felt like I was dragging three of the five players just from one location to the other, just painfully like here you go, here's a thing, requires a lot of setup, and you're not really engaging. And I fucking ended it. That was I talked about this a couple of weeks ago where I was like, Elijah's saving this campaign. I was so I just fucking couldn't take it. I was like, it was so difficult to run and it was so ungratifying to run.
Mm-hmm.
But that was like a number of issues. But generally with players, as a player, um, like when you're presented with a story, you need to stay on top of that story as best you can because everyone obviously has their own things going on in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And you can't expect everyone to like know, at this point I've given up on people understanding location names, or but there's some things that like you need to understand. um so there is that. It's partially, it is on the players to understand what is happening in the session, and of course you need to set that up as best you can, and then give them space for it. And the other side of this also is that the players who talk a lot, um, and it depends because it's not just a face player. There are the players who like go off and do
Yeah.
bits.
I have an undisclosed amount of players who aren't necessarily face, but do have a lot to say in scenes where they're involved in. So there is a difference, between just like face face players who have the talk a lot, and then also people just talk a lot. Three
Um,
different categories of
yeah,
individuals.
but there are kinds of players who need to understand when to shut the fuck up. Because it's like there is a kind of, at least in my games, there is a goal through role play.
Mm,
There is an intention. I'm trying to tell a story, and of course that doesn't like need that everyone needs to be on topic all the time. But what I've
yeah.
noticed is that when people are off topic, they will tangent a lot and kind of steamroll some potential um uh opportunities for other characters to have role play scenes. And that
Hmm.
and but also that just comes from people like, oh, I'm having fun with a character. um but yeah, like I think it is because players, I don't think players often consider um what skills they should be picking up or what they should be working on as a player. I don't think most people think about that.
Hmm.
Most people don't think about storytelling or any narrative thing. It's because the game, the things that you have to reference for getting better at the game are just mechanics. So people think about that more often.
Hmm.
But there are a lot of cues to pick up on for like
Yeah.
story. And the last thing I'll say, um, the only other thing you can do as a DM is to like I do like the reflections thing. So I will take a moment in a session to be like, I'll sometimes do some contextualizing of like, here are these events that have led to where your character is at right now. And with that context, what is your character feeling? And do they talk about it? And honestly, most of the time, I don't get a great, um, it doesn't as evolve into or like transition into a scene as much as I would like it to.
Mhm.
Um,
I
because
still think it's a good
yeah,
thing to do.
yeah, yeah,
But just because as somebody who like I experienced being asked that for the first time in your games. And I realized that it's also just like a great tool for the player to like and like kind of remove that dissonance between them and their character. Because I've had plenty of players who just like the way that they play their character is like kind of impulsive or
mhm,
and I don't just mean like in playing a character who makes impulsive just there's a difference, you know what I
mhm,
mean? Um or like there's not a lot of intentional thought put behind
yeah,
their character and their motivations and how they feel about things. And so when I went through that in your game, I was like, this is a very good tool because I know how it feels as a player to be asked that. And it makes me think about things that I maybe was not thinking about before. And the more that it's gone on, I am now thinking about that a lot as a player, you know, just because it's something that gets put in your toolbox and then you're actively thinking about it because you've been doing it. And so
mhm,
now before I've even been asked in one of your games, before the Tucker Dark times where I didn't know what was going on ever, um, uh, which was I for anybody watching, I just was super sleep deprived, so I couldn't uh, hold on to any information that I was being given. But before that, it was like before you even asked, I kind of already have an idea because I'd been asked so often at the beginning that I knew how my character was feeling going into something and their motivations going into it.
yeah,
So it's a very good tool, but there is like, oh fuck, what was I gonna say? There was so many things you said that made me go, oh, like light bulb, light bulb, light bulb. And then I just kind of like flopped because I went on a little tangent. But I think A, there's a little bit of a struggle coming from like you know the thing about playing D&D with your friends and playing D&D with strangers and this also kind of like connects into like talking about like party dynamics because certain people just fit so much better. It doesn't even have to be like a I don't like you type of thing. Just certain people don't have like that kind of chemistry, you know?
yeah,
Like Bunky Cool, we very quickly at least us, like our us first four, and then as we added Jack and Trixie, like the vibes were there still. But even when it was just like me, Parker, Elijah, Flip, it very quickly was like felt like talking to my friends
mhm,
and playing D&D with my friends. It felt like a home game, you know, even when it wasn't. And just not all games are not all D&D games are equal
yeah,
or built the same. There's the humans are complicated and the way that they interact socially are complicated. And then there's the autism D&D Venn diagram that you add into the mix. And also given that D&D is like when you think about how D&D is becoming kind of like not just a silly little nerd thing
mhm,
for silly little nerds who interact with each other in a very specific way do like there is like something I've started to notice about things that are generally nerdy in general lately. Like I remember walking downstairs the other night. It's just an example. I'm walking downstairs in my house, and all my roommates are playing Magic the Gathering. And I see like my roommate and then like his friend, who are not people who like when you meet them, they don't seem like the type. They're very, I don't know how to explain like kind of that culture of like nonstop sucking on your vape. You meet them, they dap you up, they listen to like a lot of just like because it doesn't really like scream like little nerd. It doesn't scream to me like when I go to Crit Castle, which is the the little place in Aurora that sells dice and figures and stuff like that. And there's like a nerd man who's like a little weird and a little strange, and he won't stop talking to me about D&D, but I have to leave, you know. But he's like so caught up in it, and like, you know, the kind of vibe I'm talking about, like people that I just like back when I was a teenager wouldn't see engaging in like spaces with D&D, Magic the Gathering, Warhammer, stuff like that, like have started gravitating into those spaces, which is wonderful. I think it's very fun. Um, and like I'm cool with it, but you're just seeing like new kinds of people starting to play with each other. And so sometimes I'll have players in my games where I'm like, you don't immediately strike me as like the type, and maybe that's just me making assumptions and judgments. But there's like, again, humans are complicated. And like D&D as I knew it as a teenager and even now is like a little bit different, and the space is a little bit different. And just so not every party meshes the same way, and not everybody has the same like play styles, goals, or even like communication outside of in character role play, and that just creates like such a different vibe. So like for example, you could have the same DM and like play in two different games with them and have like drastically different vibes across parties depending on who is in that party.
Very aware. I the vibes across all my parties are vastly different, and that's the thing that is I struggle with a lot in the crossovers, because I realized something, which is something that specifically was not happening in a first session of a game, a TTRPG game. It's about you want to connect the party. You want to put something together that puts people in places and kind of gets them to get to know each other. And what I've noticed is that people get very insular and very comfortable. I think people settle into a kind of feeling and don't break it. There's a feeling of like being comfortable. And that happens on a couple of levels. Like it happens, I've noticed, with character progression, where I've had players message me or have thoughts or generally about being like, oh, I think my character's going in this direction. And they haven't really um uh changed all that much. And there's also there's so many layers to um like my issues with players, um or like the obstacles I have in trying to like facilitate a story, um because you do have all these different play styles and you have all these different intentions. And when someone has a well-established character, who they've been playing with a certain group for a long time, and you introduce them to another group, they they tend to kind of stick to what they know. I've
Mm-hmm.
noticed that now. I've literally, except for Fulia, but like almost all the parties in their respective settings have met each other. In the Ebens, all four parties have met each other. In Actios, the two parties have met each other. Um, and in Fulia, the two groups of four have met each other. And next week, like literally a week from today, is the beginning of the events that um, like connects everyone, all eight parties in one place. Um, so it's I think there is a yeah, like, and again, like we're professional GMs, like of course the skill gap between us and players is going to be different. I have a million fucking thoughts. I think a lot of people, the thing that they build on is presentation. Is like mostly how the character presents, and how they present to other players. And sometimes there's like on the higher end, there's internal kind of like what's the character arc. But I noticed a lot of people um uh don't have a strong grasp of character and how they change, and like it's really hard to kind of get players, a lot of players, in a mindset of So
Yeah.
this has happened. Like, so here's sorry, I said this in a video a long time ago, like a YouTube video. I'm gonna try to shut up in a second, but um um I can't remember the exact analogy I used, but maybe I should like link it at the end of the pod. But in creating characters, there should be a like central thing that a character could be pulled either way on, like a central conflict that like you know, I hate my parents, and the character yeah, the events in game will either get them to hate their parents more or come to love their parents, something like that. Like that's like the base of like I have a focal point at which, or like a knife's edge at which like everything balances. I don't know. Which I find a lot of people in their characterization um is very, at best, slow burn, and at worst just static. um or it seems in some senses unaffected. I have a really hard time, or I'm struggling with with like a number of characters right now where I'm trying to figure out, and I'm a little overwhelmed with like the amount, but I'm trying to figure out like how do I connect you to this story. And part of the obstacle is just the players around and how they engage, and the dynamics of like this is a um like this is the fun zone, this is not the serious zone or whatever. But also I think this really is like a long-term issue, because in some senses there are some players, and there's not that many, and I would even say that there's no one in my games who is like unsuitable for the stories being told. But um there are players who I am not the best DM for. They should have, you know, found someone else.
Yeah.
Because
It's not even like their play style is particularly bad. It's
yeah.
just not suited for
Mhm.
you specifically in your
Yeah.
DMing.
And when it comes to this like large scale escalation of events across campaigns, I'm beginning to encounter some bumps, um where it's like, ooh, I am having a hard time getting some aspects like in line or on theme. And sometimes it's because players join, like I've had like in the last third of the campaign, um like I've had players join games, and it's like I need to do a lot more work to get you on theme and to get you up to speed and to give you a position in this story. um and that
Mm.
is so there's so much theming to manage that
Yeah.
I'm very
And it's
much.
already a balancing act as it
Yeah.
is with players even at the beginning of like
Yeah.
making sure everybody kind of has the time to shine a little bit and to feel very involved with the story and what's happening. And then I imagine once you're running a billion bajillion crossovers where really heavy shit is happening,
Yeah.
I mean, become a little bit difficult. Um,
I'm looking
yeah.
forward to the time between games in the summer where I'll have like at least a month to prepare the next phase of
You're
setup.
going to be running just as many games as this. First of all, wait, I have a question.
Mhm. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
The the Falia stuff
Mhm.
is going to. This is actually like kind of unrelated, but related.
Mhm.
The Falia stuff is going to end,
Mhm.
right? In like what, like June-ish?
Looking June right now. Yeah.
Okay, looking June right now. Falia stuff is going to end in like June-ish. What about the Godlands and all the other shit?
Godlands, I'm aiming for the same week.
Okay.
I should probably do that today of scheduling out the general arcs for the Godlands. The Ebons, because it's bi-weekly, I'm 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 doing a lot with that campaign that kind of the campaign's going to go on forever, but also it's just going to go through different stories. So the principle behind that, and I'm very excited about this actually. I
How
have
many Evans games are there?
4.
Okay.
So the thing I realized about a setting like the Evans, because the Evans is a heavily homebrewed setting. There's like 5 homebrew races, and
Mm-hmm.
then rock gnomes and dragonborn. And there's all these politics and this complicated stuff, and it's not super accessible. I can't boil it down to, oh, in Fulia there's orcs, elves, humans, dwarves, halflings, and gold dragonborn or Actios. It's an ancient Greek analog about
I have a
apocalypse thing.
whole thing for you later about like how I like there's a part of my brain that wants to like even take the base races and like really shake them up, but the inability to make that like super accessible to players just really has me stumped. We'll get to that later, but I have a whole thing about it.
I've had some race revelations as well recently.
Race revelations.
Yeah, turns out the other
Brandon, cut
race,
that.
yeah, no. But uh, in the Ebens, complicated. Oh, I can't really explain it.
Yeah.
So the intention of the of or the way I get people into the campaign is by being like, oh, your character is an adventurer. They're going on an adventure. There's a loose tie that brings them into the setting, and they get caught up in the story. And what I realized is that that is the best way to run a game of D&D in the setting. I don't want to tell stories through D&D in that setting. I'm changing the way I'm running stories. So it's in the saga vein, like in the like style that I'm designing a game around, which is like, as of last session, most characters have gone off in different directions. One of Elijah's characters is becoming a knight and going to be like restoring the honor to his order, maybe becoming a little bit of commander for a little bit before he meets back up with the party. Because it's like, it doesn't make sense. The problem I have with D&D is that it doesn't make sense in every story, in most stories I would even add, for all of these characters to be there from start to finish. It doesn't make sense. Characters have different, if your uncle is over in the other part of the country doing X thing, he's not going to wait for you to show up. So you should go do that. And so it's just, there's a clunkiness to trying to force a number of characters in the same spot, for like the whole story. So I've the kind of point of the Evans now is like, we're not doing that. There, the characters might happen to come together once every couple of months, and then there's a couple of sessions that happen over the course of a couple of days. They learn some things and stuff, but then the characters go off and they have other experiences and they meet other people. And at a certain point, their part in the story finishes. And then maybe that character retires, or maybe they go off into a different story. So there are 2 sagas left in the Evans. There is the Saga of Blood, which deals with this like abyssal incursion that happened in a different land that's leaked its way over into this one, trying to reform. And there's the Saga of the Prophets, and those sagas are connected. But ultimately, like, the stories are laser focused on one or the other. And there's, even then, between sagas, because it's happening at the same time, I will have characters like talk to each other, like across campaigns. I will have people communicate and like, have little interactions. Like at the end of the last session, the big like 4-way crossover, we had at the end of the session like little scenes where it's like, oh, these characters are going off and doing this thing and having experience together outside of their parties, because that makes sense for that to happen. So all that to say, the Ebens is going to continue like that. So there's 2 more games that are set specifically in the Ebens, and then there are like an infinite number of routes for all the different connections across the world, for characters to be taken in and introduce new characters or whatever. But before that, I need to do a bunch of work this week to what's it called? I'm doing a little flashback saga. So like
Yeah.
about 3 sessions, so about 6 weeks because they're bi-weekly,
Mm.
with all 4 parties or like new characters in all 4 parties. It's about 75 years prior in the setting. That will give the players, now that they are somewhat familiarized, a like deeper dive into what these stories are, um, or what this setting is, and the context behind these stories before they jump back into their sagas and then that. Um, did that answer your question?
Yeah. So it's 8 Falia games,
Mhm.
4 Evans games.
Mhm.
How many Godlands games?
2 Godlands,
Okay.
and then two. Well, right now one, potentially two MEF games. I've talked about the MEF a little bit.
Yeah.
Um,
So when you kind of reached that June, I called it, I can't remember who I was talking to about this, but I called it like the new season.
mm,
Um, do you plan on running, like, are you running? I know there's some parties that are staying together,
mhm.
just the players at least are
Yeah,
staying
yeah.
together. Are you planning on continuing to run the same amount of games you've been running?
Fuck no. Well, like so after when I come back, yes, but for um like it 4 to 6 weeks, I will have just Tuesdays going, and then maybe
Mhm,
even then like a little like 2 week break for those ones. And then I might do a couple of extra bunky Kuel sessions. I might do one shots here and there. I might,
mhm.
there might be
I love a
one
one
other
shot.
party who has an extra session or two at the end. Um, but for the most part, it's like I need a lot of time to prepare a Svednum, and I also need to decide what 2 settings I'm bringing in for the new one.
Yeah, that was my other question is like you might not even have this answer. My cat is she wants to be on my desk so bad, and I keep corralling her, and then she goes to another spot because she like desperately needs to be here. It's really important. She's very invested in Savannah. Um, that's kind of also my question was like, do you know about like how many parties you're going to be running in that specific setting?
I at least 6.
Hmm.
Um, but I also I think it works very well to have um many, what am I saying here? Like a large number of parties in one setting. So I might do 6 and 6. I might do 12. But just expand like where the stories take place. I might because Savednum is very large, and the Savetic Empire goes all to, oh, it's my mic is in front of the way, but like all down here
Hmm.
is Savetic Empire, and especially for Philia, um we have the nameless red archfey, and that's why the trees are red. There's also a nameless yellow and a nameless blue. Um, those have always been connections in the world, that are so far reaching that it was never relevant to bring up in the in Folia. There might have been an offhand reference once in a single session, of the like 160 or 70 Folia sessions that have run. There might have been once in this Scarlet Sleuths game where they were in the Feywild, and it's like, yeah, the yellow court and the blue court, um, and that was it.
Hmm.
So I'm struggling to find out what works best, because there are some settings I also have, like Xerxes, the one shot we did, which is this like slice of life post apocalyptic thing that most parties are not going to be good for. I can't put 6, maybe even 4. I might not be able to put 4 parties into that setting because it requires a specific style of like role play or not even role play, but like a style of play that just won't work for most groups.
Mm,
Um, and but still, every one of my stories, there's not one story that will be better off having, except for the anthology horror stuff I'm doing, but we'll be better off having um, less than at least three parties.
mm,
There's one setting that I could do that I was thinking about running anyway because it's connected to the anthology thing. Um, that I could run with three parties, but that also I might slate eventually for the Evans. Um, um,
but you're thinking of bringing like two other settings other than Savannah,
so you say
or
that
is
again.
that did when you said earlier you have to decide which two other settings,
Oh no,
like as
so
in
yeah, no, I don't know. Like so Savednum is one of the two settings
yeah,
that's
okay,
next,
okay.
but I don't know what the other one should be.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I can go through because I want it to be there's some groups that, well, actually, I know I've thought about Drain a little bit. Drain would be a good setting to run. That's the dwarvish western one. So
I do love that one.
I could put a lot of parties in that. Like the Saturday 6 p.m. Um, and Bunky Kuhl would be good for those. The Yeah, but it's complicated. It's real complicated. Um, uh, because I have this thing where it's maybe I just, if players can, some of them switch the games they're in, because schedules will also change anyway, and I'll have to get new players, and there's all the stuff to consider. It's not going to be as clean as I like it. There
Mhm.
might be some players who my brain's blowing up because I just realized the two Actios games can go straight to the Geraint, and then that puts four in there at least. So never mind, it could be fine. But um, the other thing I was going to say is that I want the players to be rewarded for investing in the world. And if players have been in Folia for a long time, taking them to somewhere that has a relationship to Folia in some way or has some connection or something would be better than
Mhm.
taking them to a new place. But also, new places could be exciting.
I think it
The
also
world is,
depends a little bit on the party. I
yeah,
think certain parties are probably a little bit more malleable, a sense of like where they can be put and whatnot.
yeah, yeah. But there's, it's, it's, yeah, complicated because with the Savednum has a very strong theme. And that is the vibe of that setting is, are these people worth saving? Because the Soviet Empire, um, in its history, in the two eras that it's had, and we're kind of, it's just collapsed the end of the second era, 60 years before Folia started.
Mhm.
Um, it has gone across the world and conquered. They worship a deity who is about ego and power and nothing else. There's no moral care. They are a bad people. That their like foundational kind of principles and their ideals that have been
Mhm.
passed on from generation to generation are bad. And there's only so much better that they could be. And the way they get better, or the path forward for them getting better, is going to be very hard fought. Um, uh, they're
And
probably
yeah,
going to come out the other side still bad. Um, And so that is a also a something I'm very cognizant of, because that is going to be a, I don't know how well that will resonate with the parties. I don't know.
That's a
Um,
hard thing to pitch,
yeah.
especially because we've already talked about how in D&D. I was actually rewatching this clip the other day where you're talking about like you see a guy being stabbed
Mm.
and the guy's like players like well, do I know him? And like you know that this character is like a good like the way that their backstory is written, they're like good aligned. So you're like, it's a guy being stabbed, you know? And so I feel like coming into a story where like it's kind of like, look at all these terrible shit people. Are they worth being saved? There's definitely going to be a disconnect with some players. And that's just something that
Yeah.
players do you know, of like a something they whatever.
Yeah.
Besides the point, but yeah, I imagine that's I don't think that every party would be like a like I imagine there are some parties that just wouldn't be a wonderful
Yeah.
fit for something like that. And
There,
it's some characters are moving over, right? Is
yeah,
was
yeah.
that like
So
some
that's the
characters are
thing.
from Filia or
Yeah.
going to Svedman?
Because
Mm-hmm.
they're at the meeting of the monarch in a week, and this has been set up. This has been literally, I would say, within the first 10 sessions of Folia, before there was even a second campaign, this was set up, that there are Folians who will take an oath, or like the monarch as a collective will take an oath to send help to Savednum. And
Mm-hmm.
there is going to be conflict in like, we've taken this oath, these people fucking suck. Um, uh, but it's like there are definitely some parties who will do well with that. Um, but
Yeah.
also like as a story, and again, to be fair, I have like 30 minutes a week to think about this. So it's just going to take some work to be like, what is the story there, and how does that continue for another year?
Yeah.
Um, it could be a thing of like, I do the
Yeah.
saga style where rather than this happening over the course of like a like 8 months in game, this is like a multiple year story that like every once in a while there's a time jump, because it's you know undoing 60 years. There's a lot of honestly there's a lot of like parallels that I'm really excited
Yeah.
about. But
Mechanically, the characters who move over, I don't know how matched Philia is in like levels between parties. Um, how who's the highest level party you have in Philia?
highest is 10, lowest is 6.
Okay.
So by the time Savednum comes around, the 10s will be around 12, and the 6s will be around 8, maybe
Mhm.
9.
I think I'm level 6, right?
Yeah.
I should have
And
asked you that when I was like, give me the rundown.
I mean, we're gonna level up the Bunky Kuel. Um
Hmm. It just like
to,
popped in my head that I was like, you Jesse just recapped me on everything, and I don't know what level I am.
yeah.
Uh, um, okay. So the people who move over, I imagine keep their levels.
Everyone gets
Is
bumped to 10, and then the one
everybody
party
that gets
that's at 12 uh
okay?
uh it stays
Okay.
at 12.
Yeah, I was just a little curious about the kind of like the mechanics there.
And really
Like
there's
moving
only,
over.
if Elijah the Younger continues, because he joined the first campaign recently, and so if that character continues on, then I might even do it to be like, there's two level 12 characters and everyone else is level 10. Um, um, but sorry, continue. Brain,
Brain.
I brained.
I have my Friday games. My characters are not technically evenly leveled. Um, because there were certain points in which like certain backstory things were established, and I was like, I've already leveled you this much in this thing, but like realistically, based on your backstory, you should have at least a level in this other thing, you know? And so they've kind of ended up a little unevenly leveled, not drastically. However, that's also my home game, so I just have more like I can finagle things more. I don't have to follow all the fucking rules all the time. I can
That's
bullshit things.
another thing that I don't like about D&D, as a game system, is that there is no story structure within the game system. There's nothing, they don't provide context for and maybe they do it a little bit in setting books as to like where you belong in the world, but like at what scale, or like what the scale of levels mean and what it means to start at level one.
Yeah.
Like it doesn't really feel.
I've had players who I've noticed I have this player Ian. I don't know if he watches these. He might. I think on occasion he does. He's the first player I've ever had who was like, I'm level 3 in this thing. How did I get to level 3? My backstory is that I'm a brewer. How did I get to level 3 in this thing? What have I been doing up until the point that we start that causes me to be at that level? And my brain was like, I don't fucking, I've never had a player fucking care. They're like, yeah, fuck yeah, I'm level 3. And like sometimes their backstory doesn't even have anything to fucking do with that. Um, you know, and it's usually related in some way, but like sometimes it just doesn't like there's not as much of like a click in like well, first of all, it depends on the class. Depends heavily on the class. Most warlock players, for example, their backstory does kind of tie into like how they got their levels. I feel like warlock is one of those like classes that like kind of is innately tied to like some sort of like heavy backstory thing. But I have had players who like lived like almost a sort of like relatively like they come in to the story with like a pretty normal um upbringing, and then they're like 3 levels in something. Because I don't tend to start at level 1.
Mhm.
I think it's lame and gay. And but like he was the first person ever to ever like really like inquire with me like about like, well, how did I get to this level? What have I been doing that would cause me to like build that skill? And I was like, oh, holy shit. Got a big
I
brain over
feel like
here.
that should be also like that's the players. That's the player's part is to.
Yeah, yeah. But he definitely had like ideas.
Mhm.
We had a conversation about it, you know. But most sometimes I've had players come in and like, okay, so there's like this thing, right? I've noticed I'm really invested in like my characters and their backstories, you know,
Mhm.
maybe more than some DMs are, in the sense of like, I'm going to talk to you. I know that like there are some players who like they'll be like, this is the general vibe of my backstory, and then that's like kind of it, you know what I mean? But I tend to like get into kind of like the nitty gritty with them, with like kind of what that means for the character moving forward and where they've been all their life and da 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 da, you know. Um, but like there are times in which like I guess that it's less often with me, but there is like I guess like just because I don't have as many players, so I kind of have time to really invest in everybody, you know. I just don't have a bunch of people to keep track of all the time. I'm probably still working unpaid a little bit more than I should be, but there's like a some people are there's just I don't know if it's just like not as much intentional thought about it, or they feel like they're just going to do it later, or like it'll kind of come as they go, which I kind of understand that thought process, but um there is a like not a lack of investment, I would say, but like a lack of like mindfulness about that sort of thing. But I think it's also
Passive.
just like, yeah, passive, very passive. Versus like my other like some other players who are like very, very engaged and like mindful in the way that they make characters and what they've been through up until the point that we get to where we start the campaign. Is just like different between people. And I try to kind of afford everybody the same amount of like interest in their care, but sometimes I just don't get a lot back. You know, I'll be like, well, I have this idea, and this idea, and I just don't receive a lot in return. You know what I mean? And so eventually, like, especially as this is my job, as much as I'm having fun doing it, because I was thinking about that the other day, that I really enjoy my game so far, and like I'm having fun as I'm DMing. I don't really have a game that's like ew, or like that's just kind of a drag for me or anything like that, like a or even like neutral, you know. However, and I think I'm very lucky for that. But there is like like I'm still like providing a paid service. And there's only like so much that I can invest in like a player and their character, so much kind of unpaid time on my behalf, and not receive a lot back, I guess. Um, and now there is like a level of like I can kind of catch on to a player as we're talking about like I guess like what kind of information they want and where their investment is. And that kind of like mitigates some of my time and effort. But there's just other times where there's just been a little bit of weirdness, or like a little bit of a learning curve, so to speak. I can't think of a better phrase when it comes to that. um, but no, it was like the level thing. I just the first time a character, like a player, had ever been concerned with like, how did I get those levels? What does that even like mean? um, but no, there isn't a lot. I've tried to quantify it a little bit within my world, specifically when it comes to wizards, because like there's just something like about reading about wizards where I'm like the scholar like the way like wizards come about and the time spent studying and all that. But even then, like no, yeah, it's kind of like the whole thing you said of like how it is. I sort of like quantified and the importance put on it with levels. Uh,
Yeah. I think
D&D is weird.
my yeah, I think there's too much consideration. And again, it's like it's not a knock on the system again. It's like why would they think about this? But when you're like a storyteller, and this is I'll actually bring this back around to what I wanted to say at the beginning here. But when you're a storyteller, um you begin to consider why a lot more. You have to ask the question why? Why are things like this? And D&D doesn't necessarily, it does that a little bit. It gives you explanations.
But
But it doesn't require it's not built into it's not necessary for the players to pick a class to understand why they are that class.
mm,
There's no like structure for story. And even with the system I'm designing, like I'm taking, especially with the magic, I'm taking away the idea of cleric, druid, wizard for the start. I think that's something you discover later. I think those things are something that happens when you get more powerful. I think for me, for the simplicity of the game, because it's also a system that's meant to be like almost modular in its complexity. So for the simplicity of the game, it's like magic is magic, and here are these categories, and when you slot into a category, you're stuck with the certain branches. Um,
mhm.
but I have a huge fucking gripe
Please tell me.
um, with Critical Role right now. It's not it,
Oh, what did they do?
so it's a problem with I think Matt and the again very skilled GM, very skilled storyteller, not good at combining those two.
Mm,
I don't think that is a skill that he properly has. He fundamentally is too much of a D&D like mechanics kind of person over story. And as a viewer, and I think this is a sentiment generally amongst a lot of CR fans or people who are like more casually invested, is that there are a lot of episodes that are fucking boring. So in the
why
spoilers
I
for
don't watch Critical Role.
spoilers for recent episodes of CR for anyone who's watching. I'll give a little time. You know what we'll do is that uh when I'm done talking about CR, I'm just gonna go like this. So you can go,
Mhm.
whoops, hit my mic. So you can tune back in then. So um a big event happened where like a god killing thing was going to be released at the certain time and the parties were split and I was like oh this big moment and it was like it wasn't set up the best way There's a lot of travel leading up to it, which I hate the way Matt does travel. I think I talked about that before in the
Yeah.
last episodes. Um, but um, so the thing happens, and this party gets split into two, and two new guest players come on, and that's great, and that was exciting for a bit. And there's some elements of like through the things they're exploring from a mechanic standpoint of the world, what happens when this big event has happened. But the mechanics do not lend itself to a story. Um, uh, and also Matt's not running it in a way that's lending itself to the story. They had this thing where they entered the city and this like statue was reanimated. Or it was petrified and it got reanimated. And went on a rampage and killed some people. And there's something that, at least in my games, and maybe this is personal preference, but for me, life is precious. You come across a dead body, that's something. That's something very significant.
Mm.
Someone's died, that's tragic. Um, and just goes through these scenes where, oh, the thing has rampaged on, and it's they're communicating. He's communicating like the scariness of this thing. Um, but the way he told the story around it in the events following, so the party like ends up talking to this thing, and it's like it's confused, it doesn't know where it is, and it's lashing out, and so they convinced it to like walk out of the city. And they had this thing where like everyone was Matt in the last session had the whole city like cheering for them. But it's like a bunch of people just fucking died.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be celebrating. Of course, it was a really weird tonal thing for me to begin with, of like you're it feels like you're not hitting the right notes, you're not in the right key here. But that could be a tasting, willing to accept that, whatever. I think there's a better way to do it. Then, um, and this is also comes back to the problem of having a bunch of characters forced to be together for extended periods of time. Gets into one of the characters' backstories, and has this side quest that was frankly insufferable, where the party goes in to a thing, and again, mechanically, it's related to the bigger event that's going on. Mechanically, emotionally, nothing emotionally. Where the characters go in, there are some fiery bugs that are need to be killed, and there's a big combat around fiery. But who cares about the fucking bugs? Combat is fundamentally, unless there are stakes, boring to watch, and there are no stakes in this combat. There was a story that emerged from it that had nothing to do with the larger narrative,
Mm-hmm.
and that is, to me, poor form. I don't do side quests. I hate side quests. Everything thousand, but it was weird when
Mm-hmm.
it gets high
Yeah.
numbers. Anyways,
This is not
um,
even that high, but that's high for that made me like,
yeah,
ah,
yeah. Oh
what?
yeah, for sure. It gets weirder and weirder. Um,
Please
you're
don't.
on
Please don't perceive.
side quests.
Oh,
It's the
we're on
thing I
side
said.
quest. I have just like so many things to say in general. Um, I think I might have talked about this before, or I've talked to you about it, or maybe not, and I've just talked about it to other. I've talked about it to a lot of people I know. I know I've had a couple of friends that I talked to about it when we like talked about RPG like video games, you know.
Mhm.
Um, and so for example, like I'm using video games as an allegory and metaphor. Dragon Age Inquisition. First of all, I love the Dragon Age games, and I know Tyson's going to be like, I like Dragon Age. I know you do. I also like it. I have like thousands of hours in that game. However, that's because I'm just a little Dragon Age nerd. I understand that from like a subjective standpoint, that game is way too fucking grindy, and none of the side quests fucking mean anything. You're just doing a bunch of shit you don't care about, right? I played a um I don't know if they're an indie developer, but they're not a AAA like game company. I don't remember who made this game. But there's this RPG called Greedfall. And this game is a wonderful, wonderful example of like side quests made meaningful. Now, the actual combat mechanics of the game, ass. I magic doesn't mean anything, and you're kind of bored when you're fighting things, you know. Like you go through the game, you're killing the same things, but nothing's really interesting about it, and it's just sort of like meh. But it's not too grindy, so you kind of can put up with it because the story's good and the world building is neat. And in the game, every single side quest you play is meaningful, and it all relates to the shit that you're doing. And what I think it serves is kind of the same thing that like filler in Avatar: The Last Airbender serves. And I know I've talked about this, about how the filler is still telling you something about this world and about the characters that is important. And I think Greedfall does a very similar thing, where even though the side quests are not like, they're all meaningful, they all tie into the plot in a way. They're not like a part of the big plot, but they all kind of tie into like what your job is. Like the plot is that it's been a while since I played this game, so I'm not exactly right. You are kind of like the son of a noble, like in government, um, a prince or something, and you're being sent to a land that has been colonized by three other different empires, governments, whatever, uh, on the other side of the world. And you are kind of there to, kind of as an ambassador to like the natives who live here, and also to the two other nations that are colonizing this land. And so there's a lot of the side quests. You are gaining like notoriety with these different factions that exist within these kind of three other different like groups of people that you must like please or kind of gain a good relationship with. And you can fuck that up. But a lot of these side quests relate to that in like a meaningful way. It's not just like a go do a cargo run for them and they'll be happy with you. It's like a problem you're dealing with them. But it also like teaches you so much about the world and the way that it functions that it's interesting. It's never like just some like vague fantasy like bullshit. You know what I mean? Like it genuinely teaches you about the world building and about the people who exist here, what is important to them, what they value, and then also aids the main plot going forward. And it's just like such a wonderful, wonderful game. Anybody watching, if you can handle like kind of bleh, like combat mechanics for like an interesting story and really good like plot lines, stuff like that, definitely go play it. It's great. But it's just like one of those things, and like playing that game, I'm trying to kind of like figure out how to like hone that same vibe, not just in like games that I run, but things that I write as well. That even the thing that is a little bit more like filler still holds like value in the story that I am telling, and still tells the reader something important and interesting along the way, and it still has purpose. And a lot of players like the idea of side quests in D&D, because it feels video game-y and they enjoy that kind of stuff. But the how I make that meaningful while still kind of like fulfilling that need.
Mm-hmm.
How do I kind of add that value of interest and plot, not just plot relevance, but like world relevance and like lore relevance, and like keep it captivating. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think a lot of people like fail to do that.
Well, it's when you're telling a story, well, consider like from a movie where
Mhm.
every minute counts. There's more that's cut in movies than is, or not in the movie, but like there's more that's cut in movies than there is in TV shows, because TV shows a lot of times need to fill like 22 episodes sometimes. Um, Everything that happens in a good movie relates and leads up to the last thing that happens, to like the climax, right? And if you're telling a story, the principle should be the same. The only principle is that everything leads up to the climax. Everything relates in some way. Um so what's my brain doing here? I just went on, not even a tangent. I just broke for a second. Um
I
Everything
think that
relates.
also
Yeah, yeah.
partially comes down to like not just DM style, but the intentions in a D&D campaign.
Mm,
Like between like one like really cohesive like narrative experience that kind of like goes over like a single plot, you know?
mm,
Or I guess like the analogy you could use is some D&D games are run like movies and some are run like TV shows. And
yeah.
the ones that are run like TV shows can either be a really good TV show that, while maybe has like some fun, like filler, has like a very cohesive plot overall, like a Breaking Bad or something. Or the other TV show can be like, I'm trying to think of a TV show that was like milked way longer than it needed to be. I'm sure there's like The
Most
Walking
of them.
Dead.
Yeah.
That starts off maybe like good and cohesive, but then eventually you're like, why are we still doing this?
Hmm.
What is the point anymore? Um, but like that there's the difference. And again, some people do run it more like a movie and some people run it more like a TV show. The question with the TV show is, are you milking it for all it's got? Or maybe a little too much.
When you create a problem for a campaign, the problem needs to branch in many directions. It needs to affect every like the world, or not like the world as in like the entire world. I don't like stories like that, but the whatever your players, for the purpose of the story, perspective on the world is, it needs to affect that. So, what is the like the little tavern owner? How are they affected by the like fascist government raising the taxes? It's like, and you explore something related to that. That's like that's how you do, or sorry, like as a good example of like filler, or like understanding how, or like, or telling a story that connects in all ways.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I feel like um like Matt kind of does that, but doesn't do it well, because he even had this thing, um like a lot of the characters are connected to the central like moon thing. Oh, I forgot to do that.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that too. I was like, we didn't do the
Yeah,
thing.
a lot of characters are connected to this moon thing that's happening. But like pursuing their backstories, not everyone has been meaningful or connected in a meaningful way. There's one in particular that was never going to lead anywhere and doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have any bearing on the larger story. It's just a it's a complete side quest.
Mm-hmm. Which
With
I
like,
think is kind of like a little bit more of an issue when you are creating something that is going to be consumed in TV fashion,
mm,
YouTube video or not. Like
yeah,
there is a difference in like like if I was writing something D&D campaign that I knew was going to be like consumed by like a bunch of fucking people, my intentions and like the way that I would do it would be a lot more different. And like it a lot more different. There would be more care there, I guess, you know, in certain spots. And I think it does kind of reflect on like if this is kind of like how you're handling it on a professional level. Um although I'm sure Critical Role is quite good. I don't know anything about Critical Role.
it's they have good moments. I think um it's always, because it's always been their home game. I'm not sure if they've ever had thought of like how the storytelling relates to the system and how the system
Mhm.
affects the storytelling.
Yeah. Well, and
Um,
ultimately, as somebody who like views it in any way, or like consumes that content, it is also does. And actually, anybody who like, okay, playing D&D point blank period, the way people enjoy D&D is super subjective.
mm,
There are things that are better to do and things that are maybe not as great of ideas. However, it is really subjective, like between like people who really enjoy combat and people. However, I think if
mhm,
you enjoy like really heavy combat, there's probably better systems for you to go play.
yeah,
That being said, you could say that about plot and role play, that there are better systems to go play than
yeah,
D&D. um and that's kind of like something. Again, it's like the whole thing about like, oh, I like D&D and I think it's not a bad system. I have gripes with it. However, the things that I like about it is mostly that it's very accessible to people. It's very
mm,
accessible and it's very accessible for people who are getting into like TTRPGs and like role playing games. You know what I mean? However, like this is something I was thinking about, not to tangent once again, but I was thinking about recently about like the how do I make like level ups like meaningful? I always feel like kind of like well, it feels like I know you probably don't really watch a lot of anime, but there's like this thing that happens in anime where the main character goes, I have to get stronger. And then they receive like a power up in the middle of a fight
Mhm.
that doesn't really make sense based on what they've been doing. And that's how sometimes I feel about level ups. Even Milestone is like, yeah, they did a big thing,
Mhm.
but like why does that
There's
make
no
them suddenly
meaning.
able to extra
Yeah.
attack?
Mhm.
And like
Um,
you know how like kind of me trying to like is there a way that I can play with that? Is there even anything I can do about that with the system that I'm using, you know? And that's been like something that's been on my mind a lot lately.
yeah. Um, I mean, again, that's everything I'm doing with like the system I've been designing.
Mm,
Is just like even unintentionally in some cases, but like the structure of the first five levels of the system, which equates closer to like level like 8 to 10 in D&D. The first five level system is uh each level has kind of a meaning. And because there's this space between the intention of space between sagas of like maybe we pick up 5 months after the first saga, and that's why you've leveled. Or there's also like different options of going about it. Like for magic specifically, it's like, oh, you learn you over time you've been working on this thing, you learn one thing, and then you've learned three, and now you're a new level, you know. Um, but what was Jesse going to say? Yeah, there's not a lot of meaning within the system of D&D. And for any storytelling formats, which I think should be actual plays, like I think combat is the most fucking boring thing to watch. Even in Dimension 20, where they have these wonderful sets, I can't be fucked to watch a Dimension 20 combat. Um, um, for the most part, I like tune out a little bit. I'm doing something else when I'm watching it. Um,
yeah.
Also, I'm gonna circle back around because I have food coming and I have to get ready for my session coming up. But to circle back around, here's just a little bit of Jesse lore. When I was getting into D&D, I was listening to Critical Role while playing the Elder Scrolls Online. And I don't know if I mentioned it before or after we started, but um, the I've really gotten back into that game, and there's a lot about the scale of that game that is very appealing, and also the way they tell stories and characters. It's not like phenomenal. I wouldn't think it's phenomenal, mostly because I just like skip through all the dialogue because I don't really want to listen that much. I've played most of the like stories through, or it's because it's so I either don't care, it's a side quest or something that it's like shut up, shut up, okay, go do the thing. Um,
Mm. This is what I'm
but
talking about with that game Greedfall. You know that the stories are really good when you're not skipping the dialogue too much.
mm, um, but yeah, I've come back around to playing it, and once again, I feel like Thursday nights are now like listen to Critical Role on my iPad and play the game. But that I think tells you how frustrating that episode was. Was I was actively playing a different game, and I was like, this is I have problems with this. I was actively focused on something else, and I was like, this could be better. Um, Anyways, my Wendy's is almost here.
Your Wendy, what'd you get
Uh,
from Wendy's?
I
Give me
got
your Wendy's order.
I
I'm gonna
chicken
have
ten-
opinions, so
the small poutine, chicken tenders, and
mm,
chicken nuggets with plum sauce and honey mustard sauce. Honey mustard sauce is for the nuggets, and plum is for the tenders. And a small Sprite probably.
mm,
Um,
mm, mm.
Anyways, this has been the story of the Apprentice podcast. podcast or D&D is talked about, and apparently I really have a lot of problems with Matt Mercer.
Lots of beef.
Lots of beef with Mercer. My expectations are higher. Um, and yeah, I was just trying to keep it on my phone. I've been Jesse T. William, and with me as always, closing out the not the session, the episode,
Tessie 2 billion.
Jesse T. William. That's right. Okay, that's the end of the episode.